Thanks. We mentioned before, Renee Hovey from University of Western Australia has been working both with Ryan Lowe and Gary Kendrick on a sort of a combined project, which is 3 projects in one in some respects, to look at both the physical parameters around benthic primary productivity, also the primary productivity itself, and then Renee's combining those and bringing in some GIS mapping of those primary productivities, trying to understand what's going on in reverse.
No.
Hello?
Thanks for that. So it is a kind of a nice segue into this project now, because we can start utilising the tools that Peter's been talking about and actually building up maps of seagrasses and eventually algae for this region. And that's been what I've been working on for the past year, is looking at the benthic primary productivity in the region and really starting with kind of mapping the spatial extents. Now there's quite a few acknowledgements here. This is really coming from other projects, because I formally didn't go out and collect any of this data, but I am integrating all of the data from other projects together to build up some kind of spatial understanding. So the two main ones, benthic community production and seagrasses from the 2.23 and 2.24 projects. Also been talking with the reef geomorphology guys, Peter Ellis and the Dugong, and I completely forgot to put you up there, Peter. My apologies. But now that Peter's actually made some really headways, I think some of his data there is actually going to form probably the most important layers for what I'm doing here. So the aims are just to start with building a GIS, spatially and temporally explicit baseline information on the habitats and any processes that we have already existing. Developing benthic habitat distribution maps, and then trying to apply some kind of primary production around that. So not just understanding where things are, but how much biomass are they producing daily cycle to annual cycles. Also looking at the impacts of season and grazing, and this is what Gary Kendrick and Matt Benthic in 2.4 have been working on. So due to the kind of short time frame of presentation today, I'm not really going to go into the details of the mapping, but BBN networks, or BBN, sorry, kind of underpinning what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep it quite simple as a starting point, and Bayesian belief networks are really good for that. They also handle both qualitative and quantitative data, so it means that you can really get kind of citizen science involved and keep kind of updating your outcomes and maps. Also still using some more of your traditional spatial modelling methods as well to build some of the maps. So using BBNs is not new. It has been used over in the GBR in a paper that's already out there back a few years ago now. And so I'm kind of using it as my framework for building BBN for the Kimberley region. The northern parts of, or some parts of the GBR are very similar to some areas in Kimberley, but looking at kind of their starting point for what they've built into the model was a good starting point for us over here as well. So what I've been doing is collating any spatially explicit data that exists, and these then become kind of key variables in those models. So bathymetry is of course a really big one. It's important. Light climate, that little picture there is going to be hopefully replaced by what Peter's been talking about. For now, I've just been playing around with the K490 modus attenuation, just to kind of get a bit of a feel for how that's changing over time. Sediment, basically looking at what Geoscience Australia has across that region, knowing that algae for your hard substrates, seagrasses are soft substrates, but then there's thresholds within that for seagrasses as well, going up a certain percentage of mud versus sand versus gravel, for instance. We've also been playing around with benthic shear stress, and that's going to relate to kind of particles being disturbed from the sea floor. and looking at some kind of relative exposure index. And what I'm playing around with at the moment is using wind velocity, direction, and percent frequency to build up some kind of understanding of fetch. And again, that relates back to the kind of disturbance of the sea floor, so resuspension, and tides. Peter's already kind of talked about the importance of tides and the range of tides as well. Excuse me. So from there, also building up a spatially explicit database of any habitat information that exists. So there is quite a bit of information that dates back to the 2008 through AIMS. They've got quite extensive areas where spatial coverage, all those blue areas, it's quite extensive, and they've got, whether the seagrass presence, absence, as well as other fauna, anemones, corals, their sand. We've also collected quite a bit of data through the surveys over the past 3, 4, 5 years while we've been working up and around the Kimberleys. And we've also drawn upon some other work that we've been doing, particularly on grouse, where we've got some nice seagrass cycle data there, as well as light water data. So we have a pretty good understanding when the seagrass is there and when it's not there, and we've related that quite nicely to percent surface irradiance. So just an example of something that I'm trying to achieve. So this is just seagrass distribution map. Now this is just playing around with some of the different variables. This is just a depth-driven model, looking at seagrass depth distributions based on the literature. Okay, so this is definitely an open prediction of where you're going to find seagrasses because we don't have all the other variables incorporated here. So we need to add particularly the Benthic shear, relative exposure index models. They're almost ready to add into the final model, as well as the turbidity and tidal range. And then we'll produce our final seagrass distribution map. And we'll have an opportunity to compare this to a map that has actually been created purely from satellite imagery. So we're taking two very different approaches here to try to build a distribution of seagrass in the Kimberley region. And I think this is actually something that you'll probably find that it's maybe a combination of both these techniques, which will actually build the best understanding of where our seagrasses are up there. So looking forward to being able to compare it with that satellite imagery. My pictures are fascinating too. Okay, so the picture was a little bit of a cue. So to kind of help us validate some of these maps, we're thinking of using something a little unique in using some of the animal tracking data that exists. Goes again back almost a couple of decades, where we can see high usage areas for dugongs and turtles, and then more recently dugongs and turtles have been tagged through the WAMSI projects. So using all that data and seeing if they kind of match up with areas where we're predicting high probability of different seagrass species. So I might just see if it works from the disk, because the maps are pretty much the important things here. Yeah, if I can find it. Sorry about this.
centre in the presentation supposedly to get to the people who want to try and help Renee out a little bit.
So what I have done, so that's kind of like a big broad scale Kimberley region seagrass distribution that I'm working on, but at a much finer scale, we've taken data that, sorry, I've got the computer now, that a few of the projects have collected at a much higher resolution around Talon Island. And so from some photo quadrats, georeference photo quadrats, we have a really good understanding of the kind of spatial, almost there.
Seems to the same problem.
So I'll see if I can work from no imagery for you. So we've taken the georeference photos and looked at their relationship with the geomorphology of that reef platform. Ryan and Mo went out there and collected high resolution imagery for in and around Talon Island. So basically related what was on the sea floor there to the geomorphic features, as well as a few other little things. Temperature was another one, and created a map for Talon Island. Validation was pretty good. We were able to predict the spatial distribution of the different habitat classes reasonably well. And what we came up with is a series of categories. One of them purely in Harless Meadow, Thalassia.
Is this map we're looking at?
Yeah, that's it. It's there in front of you in your handouts. Sorry. So there's a few different categories there. It's really separating the seagrasses out to species, and then looking at areas of that platform where it was dominated by algae and coral. Now, the algae that I put down there, a lot of that was sargassum. So with that base map, I then started looking at how I can incorporate biomass production from some in situ leaf growth rates that were taken up there in the region, and also account for the effects of grazing in a little experiment that was run up there by Benthic. So some points of interest, which was a little unexpected actually, and kind of takes a little bit of fun out of it for me, because there actually wasn't a strong seasonal signal for biomass production for the seagrasses up there. However, there was kind of quite a lot of interannual variability that I think needs further investigation, because we kind of captured really only a year and a half's worth of growth rates. So I think we need to think about that a little further and go back and look at how things are changing through the years, not just within the year. And there was a little bit of difference between the sites that they sampled, but it wasn't a great difference. The areas where they sampled were kind of eroded, which they were very similar, so I suppose we weren't really expecting a difference. Also have sargassum estimates, but at the moment they're still sitting as millimetres per day extension rates, and I'd really like to convert that to some kind of biomass so that we can start thinking about kind of carbon production on these reef systems. So I started out by just looking at how production changed over that reef platform, and looked at a per shoot basis, and then took shoot density into account, and found that kind of the mid-shore region of that platform was producing the highest amount of biomass per day, and that's because there was a mix of Enhalis and Thalassia there. Now, Enhalis is growing at a much faster rate, but Thalassia has higher shoot density, so between those two they kind of cancel each other out, and actually in the end producing very similar grams of dry weight per day. So with this, I kind of scaled it all up to looking at how productive those different regions that you see on the map in front of you are per day, and it comes in the order of kilograms per day of seagrass material being produced. And then I did some back of the envelope calculations and really scaled that up to annual dry weight biomass of the different species when they're just kind of growing by themselves in their monospecific meadows, the multi-specific meadow, where the thalassia might be mixed with other species. And I say the back of the envelope calculations because really I'm just using an average shoot density for those different regions. And shoot density wasn't really counted in the mixed species or the thalassia mix, and so what I've done is taken a lower density. So it's not probably a true reading, but I think I've used a fairly conservative value. Looking at what's available in the literature, we're seeing that even though these plants are growing in very extreme environments, they're actually up there with seagrass meadows, which are actually not under the same extreme conditions. So it's actually really important to highlight that and keep highlighting that. So yes, we are talking about extreme conditions. They are coping with it fairly well though. Also can take into account the biomass consumed. And so if you look at an annual scale, there's quite a few tonnes of seagrasses that is actually being consumed, and this is just by rabbit fish, I think, mainly in the experiment that they ran up there. Okay, so this is not actually taking into account really the turtle grazing or anything, but more from the fish perspective. And my next step is to actually convert all this to carbon production using literature-derived values. So at the moment I'm just talking dry weight, but we can actually turn it into carbon. So with that, I've had a look at what the guys in the reef geomorphology group have been doing. Now they've got this really cool tool that they've set up called ReefKim, and they've actually gone out and through satellite imagery and some ground truthing mapped quite a few kind of like island intertidal areas, one of those being Talon Island. So what I've been doing is looking at how comparable our two maps are. They're actually very, very comparable. The one difference is that these guys put kind of seagrass and algae together, so I can go back and recalculate looking at seagrass and algae together, and then I can start looking at how productive each of these different reef systems are. So that's kind of like the next step where I'm going with upscaling that kind of productivity to different islands where we actually haven't taken productivity measures. So I've stolen a couple of management implications straight out of Gary and Ryan's because it still applies based on the data that I've used, but I think the really important thing here is that we've been able to start getting a bit more of a handle of the spatial extent and arrangement of the benthic primary productivity in the area. So starting with Talon Island, going to similar intertidal reefs, doing it there, and then stepping back and actually looking at it from a regional scale, just kind of seagrass presence absence. We're not going to be able to apply really productivity estimates across that scale, but at least we'll have a good understanding of where we're very likely to find the seagrasses based on those indicator variables that I've been looking at. And the really big thing about having these maps is that it's basically the starting point. There's something that you can further build on, something that we can always add and make more complex as we kind of start understanding the processes a little better. And of course, the community outreach and citizen science will be critical to making sure that we can update these maps over time. So thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Out of trying conditions. Any quick questions for Renee? Just don't realise people are fussing.
Renee, have you looked at seasonality at all with your remote sensing and your productivity levels? They look very likely to change quite a lot.
Yeah, so productivity was looked at for about a year and a half, and it was each month. I went out there and did productivity for both thalassia and Inhalis. So we do have a seasonal cycle, just a little over a seasonal cycle. And like I said, there wasn't actually a really strong seasonal signal in the biomass accumulated within those seagrass meadows per day. But it appeared that there was quite a significant difference between, say, I think it was November 2014 and November 2015. And so that interannual variability, I think, warrants a little bit more investigation. And then, because I was expecting the seasonal difference, I've been building up the predictor latest data set to have as much seasonality embedded in that as possible. But at the moment, I don't have productivity measures to actually back it up. But I think it's still really interesting to see how they're maintaining that productivity over time, even though the environment's actually changing seasonally.
You may have got a pretty atypical year with the hot water as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a few things there. I think through Gary's talking with the rangers up there and with what they did, because they did all the productivity measures, I think there's something there that they're really keen to continue on with that. So we're hoping that we're going to get a little bit more data and he's going to continue working with them. So it'll be interesting to see if that was an atypical year and what happens this year. I think they're continuing on.
Just before Bob asks questions, I recognise the times that we need to leave. What we're going to, just so you're all aware, what we're going to proceed from here is we've got an advisory group that is going to meet with both of the projects and talk about more of the management implications so that we can start to apply some of those implications to the regional guys to assist them with managing the regional marine parks in particular, but also the Department of Fisheries down here as well to discuss how other fisheries might use some of this data as well. So the next step for all of the 25 projects, we have a presentation followed by a meeting to discuss the management implications of those. I think we've done 7 or 8 to date. And we've got, so there'll be more through the new year, so if you want to come along. Please, we continue questions now, that's fine, but if you do need to go, thank you very much for coming, and just a thanks to the presenters Bob. So if you do need to leave, thank you very much for coming. But Bob, go.
I was just going to say is that, so you can see the densely stocked iridial stuff on hard reefs in the gutters, for instance, in King Sound around that same archipelago, where it's not too sanded up, you get the halophila down there. On some of these, if it's short grazed, the dugongs don't use that, as your green turtles will. The dugongs are going for the halophila. A lot of the places where dugongs, the halophila communities, it's not densely stocked at all. And I just sort of wonder, but I can tell you where some of it should be because I know. I started going up there in 1985 and it's quite interesting that 30 years later everybody else is catching up there, trying to rediscover where it's been. And
possibly ground truth.
Well, and that I think will be another really interesting kind of collaboration with just whoever and citizen scientists as well, people who kind of know the areas, is to come up with the maps purely based on
I went up there to talk to people
see
about the management of dugong sea turtles and their habitats, which seagrasses are a very important thing. Before we started this, and I wrote a little paper about seagrass at the time as well. But
so one of the things that we're really struggling with here is with intertidal. We've got a bit of information around some of the intertidal seagrass areas, but we're fairly limited still with the subtidal. So most of the subtidal information that I have for seagrasses is kind of that grouse.
yeah. Well, one of the ways.
Off James Price Point and.
Well, I'll tell you
Yeah.
about whether you would look.
Any further questions for Renee? Otherwise, we're just going to have a break for about 5-10 minutes while we close up and bring tables in, and for those that are coming to this afternoon's advisory meeting. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming along and look forward to seeing you at the next presentation. If you can actually get a coffee. Obviously, the cafe is open, there's water outside, the blue straight across. It'll be, 5 or 10 minutes just to switch things around, if that's okay. Oh, you are?
Yeah, no, I'll get back to you. I'll send it on straight away. And explore what's going on.
I've actually got pictures from some of these
I'd love to see them, particularly for the region that's up off the island. So we've got kind of these intertidal platforms around the island.
well, those ones there, I kind of need to do something here because high depth. Until Barry Wilson finally went up there, so you can't walk on the roof up there, you can down here. But see, like those ones here, the Talon, the keys of all that is if you've been up there now, is that on the edges of those reefs there's a lip, and it ponds water, so you've got your inhalers and your all the hard reefs up there, you've got Thalassius and spatial, and the Solanaceous. And so